with Scott Allen.
Hello, I am your host, Scott Allen, and this is Phronesis, Practical Wisdom for Leaders. If the topic is leadership, I'm in. I've spent more than 20 years in the field teaching, learning, writing, and questioning. When I'm not working on Phronesis, I travel, delivering keynotes, working with individuals and teams, and helping people from organizations across industries become better leaders. Want to learn more? Visit me at scottjallen.net. Phronesis offers a smart, fast-paced discussion about all things leadership. We explore relevant topics and incorporate practical tips to help you make a difference in how you lead and live. Listen Notes lists Phronesis in the top 3% of podcasts worldwide. Phronesis is the official podcast of the International Leadership Association. ILA brings together those who teach, study, and develop leadership, advancing leadership knowledge and practice for a better world. Learn more at ila-net.org. Finally, if you enjoy Phronesis, please subscribe to stay current on our weekly episodes. If you find an episode that resonates, please share it with your colleagues and friends. And if you want more content, subscribe to my newsletter, The Leader's Edge. The link is in the show notes. As always, thanks for listening. And now, here's today's show. Okay, everybody, welcome to the Phronesis podcast. Thank you so much for checking in wherever you are in the world. We have a really fun conversation, a conversation that really, the root of this conversation, for me at least, began last summer. It was July 2023. And I was with Cynthia Cherrey and Jim Dennis at their home in California. Had a wonderful evening, beautiful summer night, having a glass of wine on their deck and just learning about them. And they started to share this story. Now, Cynthia, she is the president of the International Leadership Association. She has been a guest before. And her husband, Jim Dennis, has served as a university president, a VP student affairs. But, we just had this wonderful evening and they were telling me this story. And for me, leadership was written all over it. And I kind of have this vision of what this episode will be called. I want to call it The Greatest Gift, because I think what the two of you are doing is just an incredible gift. So you told me about Cousin Camp, and I want listeners to have a sense of what Cousin Camp is. Because again, for me, leadership is all over what the two of you are doing within your family. And I think for anyone who is listening, we know that leadership happens in a number of different contexts, whether that's an organization or in a movement, but it's also happening in families. And the two of you are doing some pretty incredible work. So let's talk about Cousin Camp. Cynthia, would you be willing to begin the story of Cousin Camp?
Yeah, I'll shape and give it a little bit of context, and then Jim will give you kind of an overview of Cousins Camp itself. But I think as Jim and I were talking about this is what happens when you bring two people together who have been in higher education for many, many years, who are student development, student affairs specialists, college administrators, one who was a camp counselor for many years, and the other which has been in leader development and leadership for many, many years. You put that together, and when you spend time with your grandchildren in a 5-day camp, it just comes out in very natural ways and in very intentional ways, as we've done this for a number of years. So, Jim, if you want to give an overview.
5 years ago, we brought our 5 grandchildren together for the purpose of getting to know them better and hoping that they would get to know us better as well. And what we learned was that we gained much more information from them about ourselves than they likely did about themselves, which was exciting for us and energizing. And we gathered for a week in our home in Newport Beach in California and had a series of activities and events that we put together kind of on the lam, as it were, in the beginning, just kind of putting different pieces together that we thought they might enjoy. Spent 5 days together. They spent the night with us. We have a small condominium, and they bunked in the living room floor. They bunked in the den, made themselves quite comfortable. And along with their comfort, they also began to learn that this was not going to be a normal experience with their grandparents, that they were going to have some challenges that they perhaps had not anticipated. and what those included were opportunities to practice leadership notions and ideas, to get a little bit of leadership theory, unbeknownst to them, of course, and to challenge them in ways that we thought would be a good learning experience for them. So 5 days of activities where they planned the day's activities. We started with the very first day. We said, your parents have to leave. And they said, good. We've been waiting for that. And the parents reluctantly departed, not knowing at all what was going to happen to their kids. We sat in the living room of our condominium and we said, here's what you're going to do first. They looked at us quizzically and said, okay. And we said, we're going to make rules for the week. And these are cousin camp rules, they said. In return, well, what would you like us to say? Cynthia and I looked at them and just nodded our heads. No, these are not our rules. These are your rules. We have no rules for you. You're going to have rules for yourselves. So they spent about an hour discussing, debating, laughing, and coming to a conclusion about 7 or 8 things they agreed upon that they would try to adhere to for the week in terms of treating people as you would like to be treated. One direction, another direction, pick up your shoes and put them away to another. And out of that grew just a series of standards, I think, that they really believed in, they followed, and they made our life much easier. And so that was kind of the beginning point where we just caught on to this and kept going through the week of trying to find ways that we could press them to think more about what leadership is. And that's just not that something that we have really pre-programmed or anything of that nature. It was just, as we go, we're going to try to enhance, improve, or make them think about what leadership is. They did that with their rules. They developed cousins court.
Oh, wow.
If you violated the rules, you had to stand in front of your 4 other cousins, a model that they developed, but they didn't ever have to use it, which we were very happy about.
So no one made it to cousins court.
No, there were some threats. And we didn't have a cousins police force or cousins enforcement group or anything of that type, but we certainly had them set the standard and then adhere to the standards and then had them reinforce them with one another, which was really easy for us. So we removed ourselves as the overlords, if you will, or the dictators, and said, you guys, this is your week. It just went from there, and we had activities, went around all different kinds of things, from surfing to camping out, campfires. We had the campfires in our front room, which consisted of a small plastic candle that was battery driven that we would put in the middle of the living room floor, and we would all sit around the campfire and reflect on the day and what we had learned from one another and from others, and what the experiences were like, and how we might use some of this information to affect our own lives. And I think Cynthia and I found that it was great for the kids, but we learned a lot more than they did, probably about ourselves as well as about them. And I think what happened was we created a connection, a link, if you will, that lasts to this day. This was 5 years ago, and lasts to this day, where we have a special bond with those 5 kids as they have grown. The most fierce defender of maintaining Cousins Camp has been our oldest granddaughter, who, when we said this year, that's probably the last year we're going to do this, we're going to move on, she said, "Oh, you think so?" And she has just continues to maintain. We'll see her here in the next few days. She's going to remind us that we have to have some form of getting the cousins together to share, to learn, to grow, and to enjoy life with one another, which was really our goal.
Mm.
In our roles, like in your role, we create some parameters. So every day had some structure to it. For example, because it was 5 days long, each one of the grandkids had one day where they took on the main leadership role. And then that included making sure the responsibility of everybody being up in the morning, being ready to get out the door. It did mean that they got to choose where they would have some choices of lunch, et cetera. But it also meant they were responsible for preparing the meals in the evening and deciding of their other cousins who was going to do what, who was going to set the table, who was going to clean up, who was the sous chef. So all of those were part of being responsible for the day. But there's the other side too. As you know, when you have the leader behaviors, you also have followership. And what's it mean to be a good follower? And I think one of the things Jim and I learned is observing the eldest grands having to go into a followership role with their younger cousins was a challenge. And at the same time, great learning tool for each of them. So we would reflect on that every night, as Jim mentioned in the campfire. What did you learn today? How are we doing with following cousin camp rules? So that leader behavior and follower behavior in the unique context of it being a camp for a week was just a powerful learning experience.
And so for listeners, I think you can kind of see the power of this experience, Cousins Camp, for just a number of different reasons and from a number of different perspectives and angles. And it seems that something that's just really, really powerful about this experience is that shared space and the relationships that are built. Would you talk a little bit about that? The relationships, Jim, you had mentioned it, the relationships not only with your grandchildren, but the relationships among the grandchildren, that has to have been really powerful to watch and experience.
I think our vision is to, and our hope is that the cousins will stay connected throughout their lives and will enhance their lives one to another, will gather at holidays, or at least remember people at holidays and special moments that they've had together. They don't live necessarily close to one another, so this is a unique opportunity for them to gather and to share through Cousins Camp. So I think all of that has helped us to kind of focus on moving forward with the idea, and yet each year we've tried to change the concept significantly to, shall I say, age adjustment. So,
Yes.
So what we were doing in the beginning is not nearly as much fun today for the 16-year-old. I don't think we said the range of the age, but it's 16, 14, 12, and 10 and a half. And those are twins, the youngest. Trying to be relevant from an age standpoint in terms of what they're going through in their lives currently is a challenge for us. We've been surprised and gratified that they've wanted to continue to come and see their grandparents. We hope that lasts a long time, of course, but at least in the short run, it's been terrific.
If you would, I would love to hear from each one of you just a reflection on one of your favorite moments. We have 5 years of experiences. We have 5 days each year, so it's about 25 days. Are there some moments that stand out for each of you that just really solidified, made you proud, made you thankful? Are there some moments like that stand out for you that listeners could learn a little bit more about?
Cynthia and I would both jump at that opportunity, of course. We have one that we share and have shared with others when asked. The middle grandchild, Tyler, a year ago, Cynthia was talking with them about leadership concepts and just basic stuff. I mean, we're not indoctrinating these kids, really. We're just trying to share some ideas. But we asked each of them to just describe what they've learned about leadership during the time that they've been with it, as we've talked about these things. And they all went around the circle. It was probably the campfire. They all went around they said lots of flowery, nice kinds of things. And we're going, that's great. Then the two youngest ones, the twins, kind of roughed it out a little bit, but they were pretty good. And Tyler said, and I think he captured, an important part of the whole lesson that we were trying to to convey, and that was, he said, Cece and G Daddy, what I've learned about leadership is it's really hard. It's really hard. And we looked at one another and thought, bingo, this guy's got it. So we have reminded all of them of that moment, and they all agree. You're talking generalities about leadership, but when you are the leader or playing the role of the leader, and you have to put into practice these wonderful concepts that people can talk about, it's hard work, and it's not an easy process. I'm not sure that Tyler was necessarily talking about leadership in the global sense. He was talking about, how can I get my older cousins to set the table in the morning for breakfast or make their bed or what? But he said, it's really hard. And I will tell you about Tyler. He's and a serious problem for some leaders. He is a person who, in his mind, says, this is going to be a tough one. I'll just do it myself. I'll just do it. And you guys don't have to worry about it. As opposed to one of the cousins, the oldest one, I suspect, who happens to be a sister, said, you, go get it done. This is your job. It's your responsibility. We're not going to flourish. We may not have a meal unless you get your...
We're hungry.
And what a great lesson, though, for those kids. And to see that, then for us to reflect on it later and talk about it. And you can just see the wheels turning, which is so much fun. I'm not sure they would explain it exactly the same way as I just have. But I think it was exciting for us to see that.
Cyn, how about you?
I think one of the takeaways that we've learned is one that we all know is that we play to our strengths, but sometimes we have to play to our vulnerabilities and get better. So going back to Tyler, the middle one, he's a collaborator and he just believes people are going to come and rise to the occasion, right? And that's a wonderful ideal to have. And sometimes it works, but not everyone's going to rise to the occasion to clean the table. That's a piece where there's more nudging that needs to be done. And he's learning how to ask and ask again and request again. So he's learning that skill. I think for the two eldest ones, which are both girls, and they're the oldest in each family, they're learning how they need to listen and respect their younger cousins and siblings. And to going back to what we talked about earlier, the importance of being a good follower is just as important as being a good leader. And so one of the takeaways, and I think all five of them had as an aha moment around one of our reflective times, was the importance of both roles. And that we all move in and out of those roles at different times. And how are you effective and good in both of those? I think the other thing we learned is with one of the youngest, with Elle, her strength in organizing and engaging and bringing everybody together. And she does it in a way that creates a sense of fun and doing. So she's just got that sense of bringing people together in a real positive way. And I think that's one of the things we learned about Elle is her organization. So one of the other things, Scott, that we did as you continue to refine is we would theme every day. And each of them came up with their theme for the day.
Oh, wow.
So for example, Wednesday, the middle day has been Elle's kind of day when she's in that leadership role. And her theme has been Topsy-Turvy Day.
Okay.
Topsy-Turvy Day meant we had lunch for breakfast and dinner for lunch and breakfast for dinner. So
it's even hard to explain.
Right? So it's like, hold on, no, I had to stop and think about it. And with that, she got real creative, right? That meant that we had pancakes with blueberries and chocolate chips and more chocolate chips and syrup for dinner.
Yeah.
That lent itself to being their favorite dinner, our least favorite dinner. We had to drink lots of water just to. But with that day, she would do handstands and stand upside down before she'd start dinner and bring everybody together. It's part of her creativity, right? And engaging everybody in a fun way. So we learned that about Elle that we probably wouldn't have known.
What had the two of you, last question, what have the two of you learned about yourselves in this process that maybe you didn't know going in?
For me, watching Jim in, yes, the grandfather role, but even more so, this ability to help them really think about themselves and who they are and what they do and how that impacts others. So I guess I see him kind of flip back into that counselor role, and seeing him ask the deep questions. This last year, Jim added at campfire, in addition to how was the day? What did you learn? Are we following the cousins camp rules? He asked a deep question every night, and they were different. One was, what does success look like to you?
Wow.
And it was like listening to them talk about their different versions of success that was an oh wow moment for me, both in Jim's deep questions, which we all know in leadership is so important, and then listening to the five of them talk about that and engage with each other on that question. That was powerful.
We call them profundities, but
Camp has its own language, right?
Yeah.
but it was, how would you like to be treated? How do you want to treat others? Does money buy happiness? Does doing work that you don't like for the rest of your life just to be able to survive, how do you feel about that?
What do you think about what's happening in world affairs?
Yeah.
That was a question we asked all of them.
Yeah.
And that got into not only knowledge of what's happening historically, but also how they think about it in terms of leadership.
They had an amazing amount of knowledge and information about Ukraine. The war in Ukraine, knew a lot about Russia, knew a lot about Ukraine, didn't come from us.
Sure.
May not have come from the parents, came either through schooling or through friends, communication, and then the way they would communicate with one another also. Well, I don't know that that's true exactly, or gee, I heard it a different way, or, whenever it happened to be, it was fun to see the dialogue take place.
What else are you learning about yourselves?
Well, I've had reinforced the fact that there's nothing much better than having grandkids, having them nearby and being able to interact with them and be a very small part of their lives. And they don't know it, but they're a very big part of our lives. So just the sheer joy that one gets from interacting with 5 little kids who are starting on their journey of life and watching them develop and grow. And I think one of the things that we appreciated the most and have learned is that they unconditionally, Scott, love us.
Each other.
And love each other. Now, I'm not sure I can always say that about our children, but our grandchildren. Your grandparent who hears this is going to know exactly what I'm talking about. Of course, our kids love us, but my point is, grandchildren, it's no questions asked. It's just, boom, there's a relationship there, and it's just a good connection. And they ask me questions that I think, where did that come from? You're really asking me that? That's cool. It is so great. It's one of those peak experiences that we talk about having, and great fun.
Well, that's a great place for us to pause for today. For listeners, I hope that you have a sense of how meaningful this has been for Cynthia and Jim. I hope that for those of you who are in similar spaces, maybe it sparked some ideas for each one of you. I know that for me and my wife, this is an idea and a concept that will never escape us, that we will be embarking on this adventure ourselves. And so even for those who are in different spaces in life, I just think, again, as I said in the beginning, leadership happens in a lot of different contexts. And the fact that we're talking a little bit about family today and how it can happen in family and how cross-generationally it can happen between and within, it's just such a fun. So I knew when I heard this for the first time last summer, I knew we needed to capture this. And I really, really appreciate your time today. Now, I always close out the episode by asking guests what they're listening to, reading, streaming. What's something that's caught your attention in recent times that listeners might be interested in? It could have something to do with what we've just discussed. It could have nothing to do with what we've just discussed. But what's something that's caught your attention that might be of interest to listeners?
Well, it probably doesn't relate directly to this, but two things. In fiction right now, I am rereading Brown's book, The Boys in the Boat. Probably because it's coming out as a movie, but just going back, and I just found it's a good time at this point in our history to go back and look at a story like this that's true, but is so inspirational. So I'm rereading that book. And then the other is in the nonfiction, reading How Democracies Die by Levitsky and looking at the research they have done of those who have what the cues are and the clues around it. And I would suggest everybody read this book at this time in our history.
Okay. Powerful. Jim?
The author that I'm drawn to of late has been David Brooks, who I probably have discovered much later than most people, but the reading suffered when I served as a university president for 26 years. Unfortunately, I mean, I became adept at budget reading and critical things like that. But in terms of my own personal development, didn't do so well. But David Brooks is just such a wonderful thinker, a deep intellectual. Politics aside, he gets to issues, and I think is so wise the way he is able to dissect things and then give some meaning to them. So I think I would hold him up as someone that I've been enjoying, and he would be my guy of the day.
Okay. Well, I can't think of a better conversation to round out 2023 as we begin to look to 2024. For listeners, as always, thank you so much for checking in. We really, really appreciate you doing so. And Cynthia, of course, we appreciate the support of the International Leadership Association, just an incredible organization doing incredible work out there in the world. And to all of you, have a happy holidays, a wonderful new year. And as always, thanks for checking in and be well. Cyn, Jim, thank you so much.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Scott.
You've heard me say it too many times already. What a fun, creative, and just incredibly meaningful activity that we just learned about. I'm so excited to do something similar for my family down the road, just bottom line. And I think for each one of us, as we round out the year and as we are reflecting, I think that's an important concept, an important thing to reflect upon. Building those bonds across generations within and that cohort. I just love that. It's wonderful. A couple other things quickly before we round out 2024. As always, thanks to you for checking in. Definitely appreciate that. If you find it valuable, please share Phronesis with others. You know, the ultimate goal here is to try and get really good content out there in the world, and content that is accessible, but a little bit more critical in how we're thinking about leadership. So if you enjoy it, please share it with others. And I also have a new project, which is a newsletter. You can find a link to that in the show notes. And that also is trying to, on a weekly basis, try and get some great content into the hands of scholars and practitioners so that you can stay on the cutting edge of the conversation and where things are going. As always, Thank you so much for checking in. I wish each one of you a wonderful 2024. We'll be back, a number of episodes in the can, great conversations. And as always, thanks for your support. Bye-bye. You have just finished another episode of Practical Wisdom for Leaders with Scott Allen. To contact me, visit scottjallen.net or send me a note at scott@scottjallen.net. I'm also on LinkedIn, so let's connect. If you have feedback, I'd love to hear it. And as always, thank you so much for listening. And now here's my daughter, Emily, with the outro.
You've been listening to Phronesis, Practical Wisdom with Scott Allen.